Hello, everybody. It's November 30th, and this is the OLM V1 Milestone 1 story generation meeting. We have a couple of agenda items. So as we discussed in our meeting yesterday, there was some confusion in terms of finding out what the goal of the milestone is. We had to pull up the side action bar and then go down in the README to milestone 1, and we thought that was a bit difficult at actually conveying we thought this was difficult for people to find, so we instead decided to create an enhancement issue in the operating framework / enhancements repository, and I just copy paste what we had in that README. And this issue really just exists in order to communicate what's going to happen in milestone 1. So the milestone enhancement issue will always be at the very top left of the the milestone view. In particular, it's going to be in the no status swim column, and it's going to be owned by it's going to exist within the enhancement repository. So this should make it easier to find when new users enter the project. The next thing we wanted to discuss on the agenda. So, yesterday we had discussed the difference between a milestone issue, which, we just viewed right here. We then have these high-level meta issues, which really just convey high-level workflows. If you remember our first meeting, those would be the issues that you see here, such as number 62, where we create a meta issue describing updating the operator CRD spec to allow me to specify an operator with a particular package name. So that is a meta issue where it's composed of a series of steps, and then each of those steps get an actual work item issue. And we have like a brief description of what needs to happen, and then there's an issue related to that just to track it created against the project. So that these issues would be like the level 3 issue that we had talked about earlier. And right now they're pretty descriptive, like they're pretty high level. They just kind of outline what you need to do. So like we wanted to clear the operator controller repository in this one. So we're just saying like there's a bunch of code that kind of exists in the operator controller repository today, and some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't necessarily make sense. And we thought it'd be easier for us to start with a fresh page. So we wanted to move that to a prototype branch and then clear the branch history on the main branch in order to provide a fresh development space. We'll revisit some of these issues we generated for this meta issue next, but that's just to kind of give you a preview of what you should expect in these level 3 issues as we generate them. So we're actually going to jump into just looking at how we broke down this story, because we did that asynchronously outside of this meeting, and we just needed to convey what we think we should do and allow the community to add any extra steps they'd like to see as we update the operator CRD spec to allow you to specify a package name. So like we mentioned earlier, we thought the existing branch for the operator controller was pretty messy, and that it might be nice to start from a fresh page, but we wanted to keep that prototype work available to everybody. So we proposed creating a branch called prototype, moving all the commits to that branch so they're not lost, and then clearing the main branch. We then wanted to initialize the project with Cube Builder and introduce the operator CRD and controller. For the purposes of this individual issue, it can just have an empty spec right now. And then those are all prereqs that need to happen prior to actually implementing this story. And then we wanted to introduce the spec.package field as we suggested. And we know that there's a need to handle more ways of installing than just installing stuff from a catalog source. So we created a GA milestone issue that basically captures that we have to support sourcing content from non-catalog sources. So this would be like if you want to apply a bundle directly, and Joe went ahead and created that issue, so we already got one action item done. So this was the work that we proposed so that we get a CRD with a package name field in the spec. And if anybody thinks that there's additional work or has any complaints with the proposed process, now is a good time to raise those concerns. I'll give it 5 more seconds.
There should be package name plus catalog source, right? I mean, sure, if we don't specify the catalog source, then we pick the catalog source with the highest priority. Or are we, am I thinking too far ahead?
So I think, Joe, we had discussed this in an earlier meeting, and I think the idea was that we would only consider a single catalog source on cluster for now. We're going to assume that package. I mean, I guess it could be multiple catalog sources, but we'd make an assumption that package names are unique within the available installable entities to start, and then we could start dealing with that priority if we wanted to.
We will have to at some point. Did we make a note of that we'll be assuming that there's packages are unique for now, and we have to.
I think we said that Depi is free to choose a package if there are multiple with the same name.
Okay. Oh, right, that's right. So we're defaulting to indeterminism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is that for now, or is that our
Totally
default?
for now. Yeah, for now, just to simplify.
Yeah, and the requirement that's eventually changed is captured in the if we go up here into the, geez, where is this link? The PRD doc or the MVP doc. That's a requirement that there is determinism. So that will make its way into this project before GA is set.
That's a good point, though. We might want to capture that, just like we have that action item there at the bottom about different sourcing options. We might want another action item for capturing the fact that we need to think about the determinism aspect too. Part of the answer, I think, is that, like, if you want determinism, you need to provide more constraints. But if we say that, then we also need to A, document that, and B, make it such that it's possible to build a set of constraints that results in a deterministic answer.
For now, I think it does make sense that at least to have some sort of priority field in the entities that Depi gets, because it sounds like whenever those entities are created, if whatever way the priority comes, we can label them. And if we want to talk about the determinism right now, I mean, I say that because it's been a huge part of V0 in terms of making this determinism happen. So if in case we want to think about that right now, then that's also an option.
I just don't think it needs to happen in Milestone 1. Like, it's definitely something that has to happen before the GA hits, but like
I guess. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, if all we're trying to do is get something that can use the operator API, the operator API to speak to Depi to figure out what to install and then install that stuff, we do not need to go and add levels of determinism like that. That seems like the next step. Like, we can't even do that first step yet.
Okay, so I want to make a little bit of a counter argument though, which is what happens when are we saying that we're only going to solve for the case where only one catalog is on the cluster? Because that means that if there are more than one catalog, if there is more than one catalog installed on the cluster, then we need to make some decision, regardless of whether we encode a real priority in it, right? Do we fail when there's more than one catalog? Do we sort them randomly?
So it's
Right, like there has
determined.
to be some.
So Deputy Dave will just figure out it, it gets all the catalogs, or it gets the catalogs that are available to it, and it then apply, it would provide the one that comes up first, is what Per had said in the last meeting, right?
How is
Right.
that?
So just to hopefully cut down the discussion. So ultimately, we have to sort the bundles that we feed into the particular constraint. As it is now, what we can do is just sort by the source name, and that could represent the order. So even though you don't have like yet a high level way of specifying the order, you could just rename the source to B and the other one to A, and then you can affect the priority in that way.
In my mind, Kevin, I think it doesn't really matter. Like, I think what Per just said is fine, but I think what's more important is that we don't get ahead of ourselves and say like, oh, we know exactly how we want to set up prioritization of this stuff based on our current understanding. So we'll add something to various APIs to enable that priority stuff to be there. If we do that, then that's just extra mental overhead of other things we need to review and other things we need to look at in terms of getting to milestone 1. So I think my perspective is that extra mental overhead of like one more thing to make sure we get correct from an API standpoint is probably too much. So that's why I'm suggesting, like, let's go and definitely capture. We need to have an API to make things possible to be deterministic. And we'll definitely do that at some point. But I think it's totally fine by me to say, like, whoever implements the story can just choose how they're gonna sort those things. And from the perspective of the acceptance criteria, we don't care, right?
Yeah, that's totally fair. I'm just calling out that we're making a choice one way or the other. It's not that we can put that out of scope.
Yeah, can we add something like out of scope items in the meta the level 1 issue, so that it's people are clear, say what should be implemented, what should not be done, doesn't need to be implemented.
Yep. So we can remove results do not need to be deterministic. For example, the package may be fulfilled by any entity within any catalog source. So eventually that will need to be changed. Now, does that mean we should probably create a milestone that kind of calls out a determinism, where we're choosing to ignore determinism right now?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to say, like, here's the issue where we're gonna think about determinism, and then put that in the GA milestone.
Okay. Anik, does this address the concern that you had then?
Yep, as long as it's, we have an action item.
Sweet.
Get that issue.
Cool. Okay, there we go. See, this is why we do stuff in the open. We got a new out of scope call out. Okay. So that's basically everything that we had done asynchronously. So this leads us to number 63. 63 was primarily populated by Catherine and Pear, so I'm gonna let them kind of take over the speaking role, and I'll just continue to share my screen.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing, Alex, is that I think in that last bullet point in the acceptance criteria, that the format of the references needs to be determined as a part of this ticket. I think that's captured by 64.
Sorry, you're speaking about this bullet.
Yeah, I that last part, that last sentence is captured by 64, but I just want to make sure that if I understand that correctly.
So this one was meant to say, Deppy gave me a list of stuff, and then I need to find out what I actually need to install from it. And then this one, oh, we can't, so you're suggesting that we remove this part of the acceptance criteria?
Yeah, I think so. Because that at least in my reading of it sounds like it's like.
So I think this is slightly different. I think this one, like this call out is simply stating that like we have to decide on what Deppy is going to return. And then 64 actually handles reconciling.
Right, but like whatever.
Returned to that format.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe that prereq is this bullet point then, because like we put a prereq in that other ticket that was basically to figure out what that format should be. So either we need to just make this prereq into that one, or
I agree with you there, because that needs to be decided before we can actually start writing any code to deal with.
Do we have, so these stories are sort of framed as how the operator controller uses Deppy. So I guess I wonder, like, do we have a separate set of stories that are like Deppy exposes these libraries such that they're ready for operator controller to use?
Yeah, well, so we did have a separate story for it. We essentially put it in here as prereqs. So those last two ones of removing the operator scaffolding from Deppy, and then deciding and then enabling Deppy to be imported by other packages, like those capture that. I don't know if we want to make that its own thing.
We should just probably tag those into OLM v1 project, right?
I think they are already. They show up under to do.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, sweet.
And then do we want to reframe this one? Because I kind of wrote this off the cuff. Does this one look good as a prereq?
I think so. It might be better to put it into the action items, because that's actually part of the acceptance criteria of the.
Yep. Sorry,
Yeah, no worries.
I had just copied it back to the prereqs because it was in the ticket that came after this one. So, oh, speaking of which, we might want to like list. We might want to order these, say like 63 is dependent on 62, but we can do that later. Okay. All right. So this handles, so just to kind of recap, this handles everything focused on the operator controller, starts using Deppy, and then Deppy returns a thing. So Catherine, do you want to run us through all the prereqs you added, just so that we can make sure we all agree with the proposed process?
Yep. So some of the stuff I think might already be done, but we need to check with some people. Like I think basically the first two and maybe part of the third one of the prereqs Ankita's been working on. So we just need to sync up around that, but she's not here today. So yeah, so basically in terms of things that we need before we can do this, we need to have the catalog source adapter, both the server and client pieces in place, as well as the DEPI source implementation of the entities sources. So I think these are really broad, and I would really like them to be a lot more specific. But again, I think we probably need to see exactly where existing work is before we can drill down into what exactly specifically is needed next. And that same kind of applies to the next one as well. There's a PR that's open that has some of these pieces. Now, we just talked about how the packages don't need to be unique. So I think right, we already have the package uniqueness constraint in place.
Yeah, I mean, it's in this PR, but these are different things, right? So what the package uniqueness constraint says is that you can only have one bundle installed per package.
And
So,
that I think that we do want to say is part of the
Yes.
milestone one.
Yeah. So this is necessary for a cogent solution. Yeah.
Sweet. And so, yeah, because this one already has a PR open, it might actually just be done, but I think we just need to double check that. And then we need to decide whether we want to reconcile all of the operator resources at once or one at a time. Meaning if somebody says, hey, I want to install foo and bar, do we treat those as two different reconciliations, or do we treat them as a single reconciliation? And that one, like, how do we want to do things like that where it's just sort of a decision? Is it just like making a separate meeting for that and talking about it? Like, how do we want to?
I would argue that we probably want to drive it to the upstream DEPI Slack channel and just kick off a conversation. And if it can't be completed via, or if we create an issue, we could have the conversation there, and then we could have async conversations in Slack. And then finally, if none of that lets us land on a decision, we can move it to a video call that we record and upload. But I think the best place is probably on an issue and just trying to do timely responses.
Okay.
So,
So yeah, so we can make an issue for that later. We need to watch us type. And then so the next one is just to define an installed bundle constraint. So obviously upgrading is out of scope for right now, but we need to at least be able to tell DEPI what things are currently installed on the cluster. And that is not covered by that constraints PR just yet. So that's work we need to do. And then we need a way to then pipe those constraints into the solver. So there's a little bit of a translation layer that needs to happen between taking the input constraints to DEPI and putting them into a format that the solver package can use. And then the other two are actually pretty well defined. So if you want to go to like open those issues up, specifically 73 and 74.
Hey, Catherine.
Oh, yeah.
Is now a good time to ask some questions about any of these, or should I hold
Yes.
this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so on the DEPI catalog source adapter client, is that the code that is going to be running like in DEPI to connect to like the catalog source adapter workloads?
Yeah.
So is that specifically catalog source adapter client, or is that just the DEPI client?
Oh, sorry, that's just the DEPI source adapter client. Yeah.
Okay. So that client work is basically anything that knows how to serve DEPI stuff.
Yeah.
That client can talk to. Okay.
Exactly. So, and I think the top one should be the DEPI source adapter server, which is, I don't know, a library for creating the server, and then you implement a stub for serving up the entities based on whatever. So that the transformation function between some domain object and a DEPI entity.
Do we,
Actually-
before we do the server and client, do we need another issue that's like design the spec for the protocol and the format? Or do we think that that's sort of embedded in one of those?
So
Yeah.
that might already
Oh,
be
sorry.
prototyped a bit in the catalog source adapter that Ankita made. So we should definitely check that out. But yeah, I think we definitely do need to still talk about that.
At least
So
doc, at least have a doc for what it is, if we've already got a prototype.
If we want to simplify, if there's too many moving parts here, we want to simplify it a little bit, we could just probably substitute these first three prerequisites. Or first four prerequisites to just make an entity source implementation that uses the registry API to talk directly to the catalog sources, right? It'll be more or less throwaway code, but it gives us time to sort of run this thread in parallel without stopping work. Yeah.
I think that could make sense. One thing I want to try to be cognizant of is like, how can we, like there's a bunch of stuff in this section that kind of makes me think, oh, ecosystem team could help here. So like, is there work that we want the ecosystem team to do on some of this stuff? Such that we can, on the runtime side, can focus on other things simultaneously. Not necessarily that we have to. And yes, I totally agree. Like if there's a way to incrementally make progress, sure, let's do it. But I'm just trying to think of how to break things up such that there's priority work for as many engineers as possible.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think that if we maybe split out those first four into their own thing, we can kind of group that with some of the other DEPI source API work that has to happen. And that can kind of be, worked on in parallel and targeted towards maybe milestone 2. And in the meantime, we could just do Pear's thing of just like hard coding straight to the registry. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just so that I understand this clearly, we removed that word catalog source because DEPI doesn't care where it's coming from, so it can be any source. All it cares about is it's serving up entities. Is that the reason that we removed the word catalog from there, or is there some other reason that we?
So the architecture diagram that I drew a long time ago is basically saying, right now we have the gRPC API stuff that catalogs directly serve. And one of the things that I think probably all of us agree on is that like we don't want to continue using that gRPC API and pull that into DEPI. It just isn't quite what DEPI needs. So the idea was, okay, well, great, like we still want to keep using all of that content that's in the existing catalog sources. So let's build an adapter that knows how to ask a catalog source using the gRPC API for all of its bundles. And then when DEPI asks it can say, oh, hey, DEPI, here's all of the entities that you need based on DEPI's entity API. So that adapter layer was purely just for talking to existing catalog sources. When we go and build, and now I'm talking about after milestone 1, when we go and build the next generation catalogs, I would expect that we won't necessarily need that adapter layer anymore. Like maybe the catalog pods and OPM serve or whatever we build just directly know how to serve the DEPI API, and then you remove the adapter. Does that answer the question or make sense?
Yeah, that, I mean, I think that if we go down this road, this might take us on a detour, mainly because my opinion, or what I've been thinking is, if we do that, then we are tightly coupling again, catalog source implementation to whatever DEPI is. And that goes against us trying to keep things loosely coupled so that things are, plug and play and throw away the implementation that you don't like. But then I don't think we need to talk about that right now, because that seems like it's out of scope for this ticket at least.
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation. I agree with everything you said. I think that's a conversation we need to have. I also don't think we need to have it now either.
So just to follow up on that whole conversation, we're considering pulling these 4 out and instead substituting it with something more focused on converting the existing registry format to an entity format. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Instead of having this DEPI source adapter client, we'll just use the registry client and have an entity source implementation that talks directly to catalog sources.
So effectively, the adapter would just be a library inside the DEPI runtime, right?
So sorry, could you repeat that again?
We basically say, like, there's not going to be a web service adapter. There's going to be an adapter directly embedded in the DEPI server, or I'm sorry, in the DEPI client, essentially, right? So like the DEPI library itself is going to know how to go talk to catalog sources and serve and internally convert that to an entity such that it can.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yep.
So does this accurately capture that, create an entity source implementation that satisfies the registry interface?
So that just uses the registry client to speak directly to catalog sources. So we're basically just short circuiting things and removing this, let's say, DEPI specific protocol for entities over the wire. We'll just do the transformation on the DEPI side and use the registry client to pull down the bundles and query everything.
Okay. And that means when you create, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that function that basically translates a bundle into an entity, we can just use that when we have the DEPI sources. So not everything here will be wasted work. And then essentially, once we have the DEPI sources ready, then instead of using this entity source, we just plug in the DEPI source and Bob's your uncle.
I think I already know the answer, but I still want to make sure that we're on the same page. Are we, that approach that we just talked about, is that us taking on tech debt for Milestone 2? Or do we think that it's worth taking on that tech debt because there'll be more effort to actually have this library as a web service right now?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the amount of work to implement this entity source, which is tied to the registry client, it shouldn't be too huge. And the main component of it, which is translating from bundles to entities, we can reuse when we move over to DEPI sources. And at least from the point of view of the solver, the tech debt would just be substitute one implementation of entity source for another. So hopefully it shouldn't be a huge amount of effort to pivot towards something else.
And it seems like the other thing that is nice from a Milestone 1 perspective here is that I can easily imagine there being a rabbit hole around, okay, well, what is that protocol and API that the adapter serves up to DEPI, right? Like that's going to be an important piece of the architecture that is going to take a little while to flesh out. And if we made that a blocker on Milestone 1, then that would probably be the last thing that we do, most likely. So I think I agree with Per, like if we put this directly inside DEPI, then we don't have to figure that out before Milestone 1 can say it's complete. But at the same time, I'd probably also say, this is that conversation that some of us were having earlier today, like, we should probably go ahead and start the work on defining what those APIs are, and do some of that prereq work that, yeah, like, it's not part of milestone 1, but we know we're going to want this like almost immediately after. So let's go ahead and start doing that in the meantime.
So maybe another call out, at least from the way that I think about it, is DEPI sources are kind of like another little framework. So I imagine it as being, what you're going to use if you have an on-cluster source of entities, right? And then all you have to do is implement the service stubs. And then from the solver perspective, it just uses the DEPI source, has a way to address it, and then that's it. So it can be its own little sub project in the umbrella, which can be taken completely in parallel. And then from the point of view of OLM, we're just saying, okay, now we use a very concrete, highly coupled to catalog source implementation. And then once like the DEPI source framework is ready, we can just switch to that. And because it's just all an entity source from the perspective of the solver, it shouldn't matter too much.
Yep, totally agree. And I imagine that looks a lot like Prometheus's client Golang stuff, right? Like a library that makes it really easy to produce this stuff, a library that has a server for you that you just have to launch. And then when you're building those DEPI source implementations, it's like just plumbing from, it's really just the adapter and plumbing from, one struct to the other.
Okay, one last follow-up question is, I think I heard this already, but I'm not sure where it is. Do we have an issue, or is this part of this acceptance criteria to document that entity API?
So
that DEPI would.
I put these, I copied these, I haven't pasted them to a new ticket yet. I was going to do that after this. So what we've done is we've identified that defining the DEPI source adapter interface will require some work. So what we're going to do for now is do a short-term workaround where we use the registry client to speak with catalog sources directly within DEPI. That means DEPI is constrained to just working with catalog sources. That creates the tech debt where we have to say we replacing the registry client with, I don't know, the DEPI source adapter client, and then we need to move this stuff to another ticket, possibly in the GA milestone, or we could create like a milestone 2, just so that work can start. Can get started. So that's the point where I'm a little bit iffy on. I'm not sure where we want to put this, if we want to create a GA milestone or if we want to put in milestone 2.
I feel like it might be coming up fast enough that we could just put it in milestone 2.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and did I get all this wording correct? So create a milestone 2 issue that covers replacing the registry client with DEPI source adapter client.
So I
Yeah,
think it's just a DEPI source client. Like, again, I think the adapter is
Oh, it's a
from the
middleman,
DEPI,
right?
from the DEPI runtime perspective, everything is just a DEPI source.
Right. And then did I get this one right? Create and it says entity source. Should this just really be update DEPI to use the registry client to speak with catalog sources?
No, entity source is DEPI jargon. So it's basically the interface through which you can query for entities.
Oh.
And the idea is you can have however many implementations of that interface you want. And what I choose to call DEPI source is like the on-cluster sources of entities, and basically that little framework that gives you that, or a little library that gives you that really easily. But in principle, you could have a file-based entity source that, you know, reads some structured file off the file system and then gives you the entities, or I don't know, for my little OLM CLI project, I'm using VaultDB. So I have an entity source that talks to VaultDB to get the stuff.
The other canonical example that we'll implement fairly quickly is the Discovery API entity DEPI source. Like, go connect to the Discovery API and build an entity that tells me about the cluster.
All right. So I think we've we've at least slimmed down this ticket. Do we want to continue going through the stuff described in this ticket, and then we can create this milestone too?
Yeah, so I have more questions, sorry. This all started with me saying, can I stop and ask some questions? So on the global constraints, one of the things there is GBK, which is all about dependencies. And we don't need to worry about dependencies yet. So I guess my question is, like, do we need GBK to be there or not?
I'll kind of defer to you, Per, on that one.
Sorry, I was answering Anik on the chat.
Actually, you know what? I just thought about this and I think I'm misreading. I think what this is saying is only one package or only one
bundle per JVK, and one per package. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Scratch that question then. So I'm good there. Okay. So installed bundle. That is in service of.
So we need to know whether something is already installed. And this will also be important eventually for the upgrade. So the way that we model up the upgrade edges and constraints.
I agree it's important for modeling the upgrade edges. I'm wondering, in milestone 1, I don't think we care about that. So do we need that?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I'm just trying to think. Then probably not. I mean, if all we want to do is discovery, then we should be okay. Like, I was just trying to think, like, do we want to say, like, we stamp out operate a API resource. Let's say, you know, the package is valid and it comes back with, hey, I found it. Do we want to already start to simulate that it's installed before we actually go do the rec pack integration, so that we can kind of exercise resolution across, let's say, multiple operate API resources, or is that already thinking step 2?
I wonder if we do we need to know whether it's actually installed, or does DEPI just need to know, like, because I've got these GBK and global GBK and package uniqueness constraints, whatever I tell you is going to be okay to install together. So I don't really care what's installed now, because I'm just going to tell you some other solution that's also going to be okay. And the only thing that we're not getting in that case is, well, I might tell you a solution that violates one of the upgrade edges of one of those bundles. And I think I'm saying, at least milestone 1, that's fine, no problem.
So yeah, I mean, I'm totally fine with this. Like, I just need to understand what the other side of this is. I mean, because there's other examples here. For instance, a conflict between bundles or something like that. You can have package A, or you can't have package B. But if you say package A is already installed and you're asking for package B, then that should fail, right?
If we re-reconcile, then I would expect that the new solution set will just not have package A in it. Like, or we won't have a satisfiable solution.
Right. So, but in order to not have it, we need to feed into the solver what is installed. I mean, I'm not arguing that this should be part of milestone 1. I'm happy to kick it out.
Okay.
Like for me, it's enough to, if we want, just find it, make sure it's there, and then write something back to the status field saying, hey, this is the ID of the bundle that we found that meets your criteria. To start off with, and then we can do kind of installation stuff and let's say cluster or runtime constraints as steps 2, 3, or 4 or whatever.
Yeah.
So
think
long
I'm
story
of the
short,
opinion
we
of-
can remove that.
Yeah, I say let's take it out, and then if it turns out that part of the acceptance criteria of milestone 1 can't be met without it, then we'll add it back in. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, absolutely. I love removing things.
Yeah, it seems like we need to make an assumption. Am I muted? Okay, need to make an assumption where we're saying that stuff on cluster won't impact resolution, basically, right?
The only thing on cluster that impacts resolution is the contents of the operator objects. Well,
Right.
and what is served from the catalog, right? Those are the 2 inputs to resolution.
Did this not handle upgrades?
Yeah, I think we're just talking about install and uninstall in milestone 1.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, then we're golden. Okay, so could you repeat that, Joe? Will only allow the operator API to communicate restraints existing operators will not influence resolution.
Yeah. I think that's about right.
Okay. And then that means that we need to create a GA ticket, a milestone blocker. Yep.
Wait, can I ask something about that? Because I think it sounded like it was in conflict with something Per said earlier, which is that there will only be one version of there'll be only be one bundle from an operator on the cluster. I think
Oh,
that's
that's, yeah, so that's slightly different. So you're talking about this global GBK and package uniqueness. This just means that the resolver set is going to say that a GBK and package within a solution set are unique. And so if we installed, like if the operator API installed package A, or the operator API specifies 2 packages, package A and package B, and both of those have the same GBK, the solution set is going to fail on the DEPI side because it can't satisfy those 2 package requirements because both of them provide the same GBK.
right. No, I think it was something Per said earlier than that. There was only be one bundle from a package installed, so that would imply information from the operator, the on cluster. That would imply that would imply that I would think that would imply that the operator API would tell is yet another thing that you're gonna get from on cluster is which bundle is actually on the cluster. Or no?
Yeah, so there's
Yeah, but
the
isn't
operator API needs to keep track of when it gets a solution set from DEPI, it's going to look up that entity ID and say, oh, that entity ID goes with this package. Do I have a bundle deployment for this package yet? If so, I'm going to update that package rather than create a new bundle deployment or update that bundle deployment.
That's handled in issue 65, right?
Yeah. So essentially, Brett, like the idea here is that like, no matter what's currently installed in the cluster, the operator controller is just going to always ask DEPI for a solution. And if it gets a satisfiable one, it'll go and change all the bundle deployments such that that new solution is what's on the cluster.
Okay, so it doesn't need any information from the cluster for that.
Other than what we asked for the operator objects and what's the contents of the catalog. Correct.
Okay, all right.
But this does. Where's the action items? So where's this thing that I just deleted? Sorry.
I don't know how important it is to capture some of that detail here. Like, we definitely are going to have an upgrade story that talks about the upgrade edges.
Yeah, I'm
So
fine with.
it's inevitable that we're going to add that installed bundle constraint in at some point. I don't know if we need to specifically
Yeah.
capture it.
I agree with you. So I'm okay omitting that since it would be a huge miss if we somehow missed that.
I think that fourth bullet in the prereqs we said we just delete, right?
1, 2, 3, yeah. Let's see.
Okay, I'm finished with my questions now. Sorry, Catherine.
So if I recall correctly, we wanted to look at these individual issues. Is that, we have 3 minutes. Is that enough time, Catherine?
Yeah, I think so. They're pretty straightforward. If you go
Okey-dokey.
back, like if you update this comment and then go back or do whatever, yeah. They're in the to-do column in the milestone, yeah.
Okay, this seems pretty reasonable. And then the other one was 73.
Yep.
Any comments on this one, by the way?
No, it's pretty straightforward, just removing all of the stuff from when we use Cube Builder.
Yep.
And then this one is just making stuff actually accessible. So the constraints.go and variable.go need to be moved into the package directory. But for now, we can keep the solver package in internal.
Okay.
So I guess that first checkbox isn't actually a thing you have to do. It's already done. But yeah, just note.
Okay. Maybe I'll just, well, I'm sure whoever, if people see this in there, just update the ticket and say it's already done. Perfect. And then, so we covered those 2. And then after all the prereqs, we have a whole bunch of stuff. So do you want to speak to that really quickly?
Yeah, so this is kind of the actual meat of the story, which is getting, basically we need a couple different interfaces. We need an interface that allows the operator API to pass constraints or generate and pass them constraints and pass them to DEPI, as well as an interface that captures the necessary solver method, which is probably just going to be the solve method, that basically allows us to like it meets the requirements of that first acceptance criteria of being sure that it can be DEPI can be moved to its own standalone service. And then we also need to obviously vendor the DEPI framework into the operator API. So I feel like some of those things we can pull in together. So like probably the second and third bullet points can be one one individual issue.
Yep. Okay, and that can probably be
actually,
done
yeah,
outside
even
of this
first-
meeting.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And then updating the operator API resources with the status. So we probably want a way where if the solver passes back either success or failure, to communicate that all the way back out to the user.
Yep.
And then that's the decision thing that we talked about earlier, which we can just make an issue for. And then we have to create the milestone 2 issue.
Yep.
And that's it.
Okay, cool. So I can, okay, cool. So I think our next step is going to probably be generating issues for each of these stories and make it so that people can pull that work when they want to start working on it. So we should probably focus on doing that sometime today, but I don't think we need to do that live. And I think this one is pretty well defined at this point. Wonderful. Well, we're past our scheduled time, so I want to thank you all for being here. Are there any last minute topics anyone wants to bring up before we conclude for today? All right, on that note, I'm going to end the recording. Thanks, everyone.